Hello, everyone. I'm here for one of my stories. This is Lindsay Dunn, and today I am talking to Ben Lovett. He is a recording artist, film composer, songwriter, and music producer from Georgia. He has composed the scores to films like The Ritual, The Signal, Broadcast Signal Intrusion, Synchronicity, and many others. Most recently, he wrote the film score for The Night House, directed by David Bruckner and starring Rebecca Hall. Ben, welcome to one of my stories.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
In addition to film composing, you are also a recording artist in your own right and have your own record label. Mm-hmm. So what is your background and how did you get into music as a career?
Entirely by accident. I was sort of tricked into it. I didn't grow up in like learning how to play music or studying music or anything like that. I just sort of stumbled into punk rock as a teenager. I was always a music fan. I think most people that get into making it for a living started out just by following a natural interest and response they had to listening to it. And that was certainly the case with me. And I went to Athens, Georgia for college, and it was in Athens that I met a very inspired and sort of dynamic group of young creative types who were all kind of coming together and blowing their tuition money to make a movie. And I got roped into the enthusiasm of that and convinced that I could do the music for it, even though I had no idea what that could possibly entail. And that was 20 years ago, and I've basically just been doing it ever since.
So you mentioned punk as your first love area of music. So what were some of your favorite punk bands?
Well, you know what's so funny is, so it wasn't even that it was like a core or like a seminal or sort of foundational musical kind of bedrock for me, so much as it was what I was into at the time that I happened to then also become interested in wanting to make it, you know? Mm-hmm. So like, had I stumbled into it a couple of years earlier, it might've been that I was making like 90s R&B or something, you know, yeah. or like, you know, in like 95, I was in high school and it was like the hip hop era of like the mid 90s was like, you know, as good as it ever got, really. And I was super into that. But at the time I was like, you know, got into just like whatever sort of mid 90s, late 90s punk stuff was going on then. And it was really just because I couldn't play. So it was like, mm-hmm. Somebody was like, yeah, you just kind of need to know how to do this with your hand. And then you can just sort of do that wherever and you can play chords. And that's how you play punk rock, you know? And it was really like, I think I connected more to like the idea that if you just had something to say and some conviction about it, it didn't really matter how well you knew how to play your instrument. That was only part of the equation, right? And I think that like something about that spoke to me as like an angsty 90s teenager. And, you know, I got into that and, but I always loved movies. And so once I had the opportunity to make one, that led to another, and then 2 leads to 4, and then 4, because you just continue to meet people each time you work on one. And so each of those would just kind of naturally lead me into stumbling into another opportunity. And it was just, my whole career has kind of been like an exercise of learning on the job.
You mentioned your first foray, and I know that was writing music for a picture called The Last Goodbye, directed by Jacob Gentry, who you've worked with several times, as well as David Bruckner. So how did you get into film composing? I'd like to hear more about that. You know, you said you were kind of tricked into it.
Yeah. Okay. So interestingly enough, so Last Goodbye was the first movie that anyone actually saw, but there were many that preceded that were these sort of experimental narratives and short films and things like that we were all doing out of just a genuine interest in storytelling. And Jacob Gentry, who directed The Last Goodbye, was the guy directing that very first movie, you know, many years prior when I got to Athens. And I met David Bruckner through Jacob, because when you are you're a bunch of kids in a small college town and you're making movies, it's pretty easy to sort of meet all the other people who are doing that, because there isn't that many. Everybody's talking about stuff like that. Like everybody's going to write a book, or everybody's going to make a movie, or everybody's going to start a band and all. But the few people who are actually playing shows with their bands or showing their movies at parties or whatever, you sort of meet everybody pretty quickly. And I think that's probably true just about everywhere. And so years later, when Jacob got like a budget to actually make a real movie with famous people in it that people would actually see, I got the call to do it because, you know, I had done his first movie. We had sort of, and Bruckner as well, we had sort of all come up learning how to do this by just throwing ideas at the wall and kind of having the ambition to, you know, stick with it until we figured something out.
I love how that works. You know, it's just who you know and the people you were kind of naturally drawn to because of your shared interests, and then you just kept working.
Well, and I always say, you know, I have found it, it's not just sort of like a reverse like euphemism thing. I really do think that it's less who you know and it's who knows you. Because you never know what other people are planning or are up to, but the more you can get people aware of what you're up to, then they know to reach out to you when what you're doing is what they're looking for. And so people like Bruckner and these other people that I would meet that sort of grew out of these initial forays into, you know, storytelling and filmmaking, it was just because someone else had passed along, or they had overheard, or somehow came across something that you did and put out there. And we're like, oh, we need one of those. We need a guy who knows how to do that. You know, let's go track that guy down. Or at this point in my career, it's like, we really like what you did on this other movie. We think something like that on our movie would be really interesting. So, you know, do you want to jump on board?
Let's talk about The Night House and how you went about composing that score. So you've worked with David Bruckner multiple times. How did you go about collaborating with him on finding the right sound for this movie?
It was a real process. I mean, I know that's kind of a common, you know, it always is, but on this one, it was an especially tricky process that took a really long time for a couple of reasons. One, I was brought on very early in the production, which it isn't uncommon for a composer to be brought on very near the end of the filmmaking. It's great when you can be involved very early. So I started writing from the script before they ever even started shooting. And that allowed me to share little bits and pieces and just half formulated ideas with David while he would be on set, and just things to listen to in between breaks, and just to have sort of more of a hybrid process where, you know, we knew that the score and the music was going to be a major part of the sort of storytelling and the textural quality of the movie. But it took a while to find that, because it wasn't the kind of script where you would read it and just sort of immediately know what it was supposed to sound like. I don't mean so much musically. I just mean like tonally, you know, finding like what's the textural sonic DNA of the movie. I really like to come into movies and kind of give it some kind of a fingerprint sonically, some kind of personality that's unique to that story. And with this one, there were so many conceptual points of inspiration in the story for things that appear on screen, like, you know, blueprints of mirrored floor plans and repeating patterns and designs, and a house that's backwards and inverted on itself. These are all like really interesting musical concepts, or concepts that you take and explore in a musical way. So I started off by just trying to see what I would get if I started to apply some of those ideas into melodies and music. But because the movie is also so much about loss and the absence of things being there, or the impression of things being there, but when in fact they're not, there was a big key in on, you know, these words like emptiness and void and nothingness, which is a huge fundamental part of what the movie is conceptually getting after. So it was like, okay, well, what's the sound of nothing? What's the sound of a void? How can that be something and nothing at the same time? And so I ended up inevitably writing and creating a lot of music that we would eventually then find ourselves stripping away because the more I started to pile on ideas onto the film, it just started to feel like it got stronger the more we would then start to take things away. And so it was this discovery that maybe in a film about loss, that subtraction could be more additive to the experience of the movie than just constantly adding more stuff in to make it scarier and scarier. And even now, like I watched the film at the premiere in New York 2 nights ago, and I was still just like, we should have taken that out too. We could have taken that. That last one. It never ends, but it's this endless process of trying to find what best reinforces the story that's going on within the characters, not just music that's describing what's already on screen, you know.
I understand you enjoy experimenting with non-traditional instruments or things that aren't instruments at all, and you kind of spoke to that already. So did you do any of that with the Night House, where you use some non-traditional equipment that you haven't used before?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's because I'm just as inspired sometimes, if not more, by just simply the way things sound. And I think the way things sound tends to probably be treated with equal importance in the scores I do as what those things might be doing musically or melodically. So with this, a point of inspiration was the lake. And I took some underwater recordings of just mics in a jar underwater, and just like, I just wanted to see what I could create texturally out of things that weren't musical, but they were, you know, you're talking about, you know, elemental forces. And I really felt like the lake, because the whole movie takes place on a house next to a lake, I felt like, and we see that lake a lot, and she crosses the lake, and it's a barrier between sort of her world and the Night House. And I felt like that needed to be part of the movie somehow. So I flew to New York and went to set and hung out around the set and sort of just recorded things, even with my phone, of just the way the house sounds. And sometimes that makes it in, and sometimes it just is there to kind of give you something to react to and somewhere to start from. So sometimes I'd be adding notes and adding instruments on top of recordings of the water, but maybe the water doesn't make it in there by the end, because that's might be sort of weird and confusing to hear what sounds like water when you're looking at a person standing in a closet. But it's like, it's just a process to try to kind of help you guide yourself towards something that might be what you wouldn't have thought to do if you just sat down at the piano and started playing.
I've interviewed a few composers now, and a lot of them talk about an inspiration board, or you were sort of talking about the musical DNA. And sometimes that comes in the form of they might watch other movies, or, you know, kind of movies that are in the same vein to sort of create this inspiration board in a way. Did you have any of that? Any specific films that inspired you, or was it completely original in this case?
Well, I didn't really take any inspiration from any. I didn't know what to compare this to. I just, when I read the story and I read the script, I was just like, I've never seen some of this stuff in a movie before. Obviously, it's in a genre that is sort of defined by, you know, the parameters of the things that make a horror film, right? And you're always trying to work within that to try to tell a new story within an established kind of medium or genre. But some of the thematic material it's getting at, and then some of the stuff in camera with some of the practical effects of the creating figures out of negative space. And I was just kind of like, I've never seen this stuff done in a movie before. And because I'm usually more reacting to the story instead of the movie, you know, like the style of it comes after just trying to understand and get inside the experience of the characters and the story of like what it's metaphorically about, beyond just the kind of the ABC of the plot, that I wasn't sure really where to look for that. So we spent a lot of time, just David and I, talking about the story and the conversation, knowing that this could spin off, you could go off in a lot of different directions musically, and any of them might be valid ways to tell the story. But a lot of it was trying to get inside of, you know, his perspective on it and kind of how he wanted the movie to feel. And when you have the benefit of 20 years of knowing a guy and getting to make a movie with every handful of years, whenever it comes around, you get more and more adept at being able to gauge what they like and respond to. So sometimes and it's cool to have these collaborators who you love as people and as friends to get to make music that, is the kind of stuff they like, because somebody like me, I like everything. There's no kind of music I don't like or like more than any other. So I love the opportunity to make different kinds of music and tell different kinds of stories. And, just in the same way that you get excited to play a song for a friend of yours that they're going to love and they've never heard it. That's kind of the experience of working on a friend's movie. It's just that song is like 90 minutes long.
Were there any moments in the film that were especially challenging to score? And how did you go about resolving that?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I mean, the whole damn thing was so challenging to score. There was no easy scene or easy part of the movie. One thing that was challenging initially, but once we found an idea worked really well, and it's kind of amazing that it all worked out this way. And that's that there's a song referenced in the script as being the character's wedding song. You've seen the movie, right?
Yes.
So you know that the
Calvary
several
Cross.
times throughout the movie we hear the Calvary Cross play. Well, that was referenced in the original script, and it's pretty unlikely at best that a writer plants a specific song in a script and that song makes it through all the logistical hurdles to actually wind up working in the movie and getting the clearance and that they can afford the song. There's a million reasons why that rarely happens. In this case, it did. Of course, very early, we didn't know if that was going to work out that way. But the song is based around these three chords in a pretty standard movement and on just a major chord in a major key. And so I had this idea that, like, because of the prominence of that song in the story, if we could maybe have a thematic element in the score that's related to their marriage that had a harmonic reference to that wedding song, but was just different ever so slightly in the way of where you can, if it's this note and this note and this note, but you play this note lower instead of higher, and you move the note that's in the middle to the one to the bottom, and you move that one, you just rearrange and invert some of the relationship of the notes in those chords. It could be very like that felt very appropriate for the material in the story and the kind of movie that it is and the themes that are already going on visually. So I tried that and it worked. And it even goes so far as to later in the film, re-inverting that into other sort of shadow harmony keys to create a darker, more menacing version of that. But ultimately it started out with just this challenge of figuring out where this sort of melodic sad widow music would fit into this pretty dark existential movie. And because there's only so many different themes and melodies you want to try to get across in a 90-minute movie. So being able to kind of create an extension of that one idea that they share this song as part of their bond of marriage and kind of have that exist in the score as well was something that ended up working out.
Were there moments that you made sure you brought out the sadness in the music in a way that was different than the moments you scored the scary parts? Okay,
well, I think that it's more about bringing out the sadness in the character than the music, right? And you have the benefit of someone like Rebecca Hall on screen. She's giving you so much already that you're trying to, or in my case, I'm trying to calibrate what I'm doing to meet her where she's at and not squash her with all this extra stuff that is just redundant to what she's already doing, and to leave it into the capacity of what the actor's doing, commanding the screen. Because in a lot of these scenes, she's just up there by herself and she's owning it and she's driving the story. And so never wanted to get in the way of that. I'm just trying to support what she's already doing. And sometimes the way to make a sad scene sad isn't to necessarily play sad music, especially when she's sad because of the loss of someone she loves. So it's sort of like maybe the best way to feel what it's like for her to miss her husband is to feel that idea of what it was like to love her husband. So sometimes pretty music over a sad looking person is even more devastating than sad music over a sad looking person, because it's a little redundant and you're not, you're not sure where one's handing off to the other. So with a little juxtaposition there, because we've all experienced that thing where what's more crushing emotionally, when you're sad and like listening to a sad song, or when you're sad and like at a party and everybody's having fun, or you're seeing something really beautiful and touching and you're just devastatedly, in your own mood and thought. That is far more lonely and isolating. And so we would lean into this marriage theme and this idea of connection with this person who wasn't there anymore, because she's doing so much to communicate all the rest of it that a lot of times I was just trying to stay out of her way.
You've given us so much in this interview, but sharing about these things in your process. And I think it'll be really interesting to my listeners. So I want to thank you for your time and let people know if they want to follow your work, what's the best way to do that? Do you have a website, social media? What would you suggest?
Well, the film comes out on August 20th. It's in theaters. The album comes out the same day. It'll be streaming. There's a special edition vinyl coming out, but I don't know if it's been officially announced, but I think it probably will be by the time people see this. And I have benlovett.com. There's a website there. It's currently needs a lot of updating, but there's lots of stuff to click on and check out. I got lots of stuff on Spotify. A lot of my records are out under Lovett, not under Ben Lovett, my artist name that I had like my own stuff out on, just under Lovett. That's kind of the band name. So if you don't find me there, just look under that. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Not hard to find. Ben Lovett. You'll know me. There'll be a bunch of music stuff. And there's been doing this a long time, so there's a lot of stuff there if you're into it. But the Night House album will be out and hopefully streaming in your face everywhere you look in about a week.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will see you guys next time on One of My Stories. Goodbye.